Yeah, in the booklet I don't question the existence of evangelicalism so much as the definition with which we operate. I think most people assume that evangelicalism refers to some core of theological belief that binds various groups and movements together. What I argue in the booklet is that the definition of evangelicalism really needs to be reoriented to being an institutional definition, that actually there is no common core of evangelical belief that binds evangelicals together. It's rather a network of institutions and parachurch organizations. At the heart of evangelicalism, I think there is a tension, if not a contradiction. On the one hand, evangelicalism has tended to define itself by an experience, the experience of the new birth. On the other hand, evangelicalism has tried to define itself doctrinally, in terms of belief in a set of core doctrines. I think the priority on the whole of experience over doctrine in evangelicalism has always meant that doctrine will lose out in the long run. That by and large, ultimately, it doesn't matter that much what you believe, providing you've had the particular experience. Now, I'm not sure that you can so separate experience and doctrine in a neat way in actuality, but I think evangelicals have tried to do that over the years. Well, some people would say, what binds evangelicals together is we all love Jesus. The deeper question, of course, is, well, who do you think he was and what do you think he did? And I certainly don't want to say that I disagree with all evangelicals on who Jesus was and what he did, but take, for example, penal substitutionary atonement. If you believe that Jesus hung on the cross and our sin was placed upon him and the Father poured out his wrath upon Christ the Son at that point in order for me to be forgiven, that's a pretty fundamental part of Jesus' identity. If you don't believe that happened, if you believe that Jesus was simply hung on the cross as some kind of great example of the ultimate obedience to the will of God, then I would suggest that we're not thinking about the same Jesus at all. Or if we are, we're only thinking about the same Jesus in very remote ways. So it's important always to get beyond the buzzwords and the cliches of evangelicalism to find out what people really mean. The incarnation, the work of Jesus, it doesn't exist in isolation. It has to connect to other doctrines. Well, I think the first thing that you need to do is reflect on what it means to be a church. Yes, it does mean to be a community, but it's a community defined by particular doctrines and beliefs. I think the opposition that's often set up between believing and belonging, you need to believe before you belong, or you need to belong before you believe, it's a false opposition. I think for Paul in the New Testament, believing and belonging are one and the same thing. So rethinking what you mean by church would be a first step. Secondly, I think making sure that your church has a clearly defined doctrinal confession. And I think the historic confessions are the best. Why reinvent the wheel? Clearly defined historic confession. And I think a clear distinction between membership and holding office. Not to create a new priesthood, but to say that we expect more from office bearers because Paul expected more from office bearers in terms of character, reputation, and doctrinal understanding than you do from church members. Anybody can come and join my church if they confess with their mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe in their hearts that God raised him from the dead, Romans 10. But you've got to subscribe to the Westminster Standards if you're going to be an office bearer. And I think that's an important distinction. And that's why evangelicalism can actually be used to create, ironically, disunity and unpleasantness. I would not presume to go to an Anabaptist church and hold office in an Anabaptist church. I'd hope they'd accept me as a member because I confess with my mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe in my heart that God raised him from the dead. But I would not be insulted or consider it divisive for them to say, you can never hold office here. I'm not an Anabaptist. Same in Presbyterianism if a Baptist comes. Welcome to join the church, but can't hold office. It's only when you think that we've all got to participate in some giant amorphous thing called evangelicalism that it becomes somehow oppressive to say to a Baptist, no, you can't hold office in my church because we're Presbyterians. Or to a Presbyterian, no, you can't hold office in my church because you're Baptists. If we think ecclesiastically, and we use denominations for what I think they're meant to be used for, defusing tensions, we can ironically, I think, exhibit the unity of Christ better than in viciously competing for the ownership of a label that doesn't actually refer to anything anyway.